Okay, good morning, everyone. Yeah, thank you for coming to this session. Um, we're starting a little late, but there are already people, so welcome again to this merge session on gender and access that is being co-organized by Empower Malaysia and the Foundation for Media Alternatives from the Philippines. Okay, when we talk about access to the internet, whether it's to mobile phones and other means of communications facilitated by technology, is of course significant. Even researchers and policy makers have identified it as central to improving empowerment of women and other marginalized communities. We know that access is also an enabler of rights. It enables people to exercise their right to information. It enables them to express, participate, and associate with other people. It also allows women the means to, for instance, run businesses with the help of their mobile phones. Young women are able to access information so that they're more informed when they make decisions. For instance, about their sexual and reproductive health. And I am sure that uh, we in this session, in this room, as well as those who are joining us remotely, can think of cases of that demonstrate the ICT's potential for women's empowerment. Yeah, access to the internet plays an important role in the economic, social, cultural, and political development of societies. But access is often not what it seems. When you simply have access to the internet, it does not necessarily mean that you can achieve social justice and development outcomes. And this workshop will examine the issue of uh, access using a gender lens in order for us to see beneath the surface, to look beyond achieving access for the next billion towards the empowerment of the next million. And in this session, when we talk about gender and access, we're not just talking about women. We would just like to clarify that. Um, the framework that we're using for this session would include the Real Access Framework, which utilizes the following entry points such as physical access, appropriate technology, affordability capacity, the relevant content, sociocultural factors, trust, legal and regulatory frameworks, local economic development, macroeconomic development, and political will. And we will also utilize the APC, the RU framework, which focuses primarily on freedom of expression, um, but has an access component. You can read more on that in literatures. Now, when we talk about the SDGs, like Goal 5, for instance, of the Sustainable Development Goals, makes specific reference to the need to enhance the use of enabling technology, in particular ICTs, to promote the empowerment of women. And goal number 9, um, to significantly increase access to information and communication and strive to provide universal and affordable access to internet in least developed countries by 2020. So clearly, you can see a multidimensional perspective here in understanding access as being essential to realize the potential, in realizing the potential of the internet for development and equity. We would also like to mention that this session is part of the Best Practice Forum of the IGF. Um, Last year it was on online gender violence. So this year it's gender and access. And Jack of APC here will talk about that in a bit. Yeah. So aside from Jack, we're joined by 3 ladies here, women who are very active. They're activists actually, and active in promoting rights of human rights. They will help us unpack the issue of gender and access, help us to better and more comprehensively understand the issue. So we have Ritu Srivastava of the Development Empowerment Foundation of India. She will walk through, she will talk to us about the social, cultural, and patriarchal challenges for women to gain access, especially in India, and how alternative models um, can improve and enable women to learn technology and internet. And then we have Jelen Paclarin of the Women's Legal and Human Rights Bureau, who will help us unpack the meaning of access in relation to marginalized groups, especially in the Philippines. So this will include women and LGBT groups, right? And those who are digitally excluded, yeah. And we also have Ms. Nigat Dad from Digital Rights Foundation of Pakistan, who will discuss about the cultural, religious aspects, as well as violence and how they pose barriers to women's access to ICT. And she will also present us with initiatives from CSOs on how to address the issue of gender and access. So we will be giving each of our speakers 7 minutes to do their presentation, after which we can start taking in questions. Please note that since this workshop is live cast, we can take in questions also from remote participants, and both remote and online participants who would want to post questions or comments anonymously can also do so by joining us as slido.com. So the event is Gender and Access. Actually, we'll already have some questions here posted anonymously. Okay. So Jack, may we hear from you first?
Hello. Hello. Good morning. So my name is Jack. I'm from the Association for Progressive Communications. I'm also co-coordinating the Best Practice Forum on Gender and Access as part of the Global Internet Governance Forum process. But it's the BPF, or the Best Practice Forum. Since 2014, IGF community, the Internet Governance Forum community from different stakeholder groups have come together to discuss key or emerging issues around internet policy and governance. Topics have ranged from things like creating an enabling environment for the development of local content, online child protection, IPv6, developing meaningful multi-stakeholder participation mechanisms, and last year the BPF on Gender looked at online abuse and gender-based violence, and so on. So the work of the BPF is carried out throughout the year, and is shared I guess the outputs of the work is shared at the Global IGF every year. How the thematic topics are decided is that at the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group meeting, or the MAC meeting, there's a report back on activities, and based on the commitment and interest of the BPF community, new topics are being proposed. So the same topic doesn't always appear every year. It changes from year to year. So this year, we proposed that gender be a sustained topic for the BPF, and to look at specific issues related to gender from year to year, unpacking the different dimensions within gender. So the BPF on Gender decided to focus on the thematic issue of access. The reason for this, as shared by Lisa, is also that it links very closely to the Sustainable Development Goal, goal number 5, and that the Sustainable Development Goal is also a big thematic thing in the Global IGF this year to look at. So what this BPF will do is to really engage broader stakeholders, whether these are researchers, government actors, people from the private sector, civil society, technical community, intergovernmental organizations like the ITU and UN Women, to really participate in this discussion and to contribute your knowledge and thinking about this issue. And this workshop, where the workshop organizers has very kindly and generously opened up to link with the BPF, is one of the efforts to broaden up the engagement to this process. And a focus on gender and access at the level of Asia Pacific is really critical. So maybe I can start with some stats, because stats are quite nice, no? So globally at the moment, about this is the statistics that just got released by ITU, I think early last week. Globally right now, 53% of the world is not connected to the internet. In Asia Pacific, 58.1% of the population is not connected. everywhere in the world, there are more men than women who have access to the internet. In Asia Pacific, the ratio is 39.5 women versus 47.5 of men. So if you think about how often you go online and the range of things that you use the internet for, from learning to just playing to falling in love, keeping in touch with friends, working, finding out about stuff that's both frivolous and important, to participating in public, political, cultural, and economic life. It's really a critical enabler to living and to human rights. And it really has a massive potential to address also issues of discrimination and inequality. And nothing is more basic on the issue of discrimination and inequality than gender. So it really makes a lot of sense to really also look at this just from that very first primary basic lens. So what are the specific barriers that women face to access the internet in this region? Existing gender disparity always acts as a backdrop to disparity in access. So for example, if there is a gender gap in basic literacy, this will affect how useful access to the internet will be. Difference in income when it comes to gender will also affect affordability of both data and devices. Specific cultural and social norms that discriminate against women will also have an impact. So for example, restrictions in movement, not having time because of multiple roles of caring for the family as well as working, control in the social life of girls, gender-based violence that women in all of our diversity face, and so on. So these are some of the issues that we hope to gather through this conversation that will help feed into the BPF document, which can in turn help to inform policy development, strategies, and propose solutions by different stakeholders. And the other part of this is what have been some of the more innovative approaches undertaken by communities, by organizations, by companies, telcos, and the government to address some of these barriers. We would also like to find this out through this process. So I'm really looking forward to listening and learning from the speakers as well as from a robust conversation with participants both here and online. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Jack. Thanks for giving us the statistics on people who are not connected, and also for informing us about the best practice forum. It's good to know that gender and access is one of the thematic issues in the best practice forum of the IGF. So from here, from the APrIGF, we can engage further and contribute to broaden the understanding of the issue on gender and access. So I'd like to call Ritu now to do her presentation.
Hello. It's bad to hear your own voice. So thanks, Jack, for giving us insights about what gender disparity in overall world. But I will specifically like to focus on India. And before I come to gender disparity, I will talk about overall access issues in India. So in India, 70% population is living in rural India. 31% population of rural India does not have internet access points. And 70% of the population in India is accessing internet through cyber cafes. Internet population in India is about 375 million, which is 28% of a total. Rural internet penetration is about 9%. Women internet penetration is about 17%. Let's talk about the female literacy, which is average, which is about 53.7%. And apparently India falls in a gender index gap is 132 in out of 186 countries. We are also below than Pakistan. Yeah. So some of the challenges which Jack has mentioned, yes, the patriarchal challenges, social and cultural challenges, which are making the existing gender gap much below than what it is. There's one study which has come out, the lack of awareness is one of the major hindrance in accessing the internet, specifically among women. 38% of a women population does not feel like to go to and surf the internet. They do not feel that whether they have they want to surf the internet and whether it will fulfill their requirement. So that also shows that there's a lack of awareness as well as capacity that why internet is meant for them, why it is, how they can use internet for their betterment of their lives. Mm, uh, I was just reading yesterday some of the things, and it was an interesting study when I came through that 26% of a female workforce and say that we do not have a time to go and surf the internet. So that shows that women has a major other priorities like taking care of their family, taking care of their entire livelihoods, and that also like reflects whether they want to really access the internet, and internet is the least priority, and why they would like to access the internet. Uh, let's do, on a social and cultural and patriarchal challenges, like this plays a major role in talking about making the gender gap wider and wider when we talk about internet access issues. There are certain communities where men have given a power, and men have been given a power to access mobile phones and certain things, but women have been said that if they are using mobile phones or internet access, they are not goody kind of a people. They are those kind of a challenges also reflect on those things. uh, mm, Girls on mobile phones, girls on using mobile phones is like, is some in some of the communities is a taboo. Is like, if you are using community a phone, that becomes like you are trying to provoke, you are trying to be encouraged that you are trying to be like, you are out of your community community's rules and regulations. Religious barriers and such kind of a thing, like will talk about, want to mention about that there's a group of girls, those who were using internet for just to promote their folk music, and in Kashmir a religious group has raised a fatwa against them for not to come on internet, and because it's not right thing for their to be on the internet, and it's not good. um, so these are some of the challenges which I feel that this is all among in Indian culture, which falls into the social patriarchal challenges, which also again lead to access and affordability of internet is difficult, is a real one major of the challenge. Like they cannot afford internet. The accessing a mobile phone and accessing any devices, man has given a more preference than women. In a family, a man who is the first person who wants to access the technology, and then women is like, they can use a second hand phone, they can use a feature phone, and why it is meant for them, what they for use for it. So those are some things which is uh, increasing the gender gap. When we are talking about the alternative models of internet and accessing, we have also seen that lack of awareness is because the 50% of female literacy is there, and the average literacy rate, if you talk about the literacy in India, it's very dynamic, that a person who can use switch on and switch off the computer, he knows digitally literate, which is a vague in a term, because they do not even know that how to use certain kind of operating systems. So the and mobile phone in the same way. But what we have also seen that in a coming trends, because mobile phone is becoming one of the major tool in India to access internet. So some of the alternatives model what we have used is as well. Let's talk about, India is considered to be as an oral society. So giving a missed call is also considered to be an oral communication. So what we have seen in one of our thing, that if woman has a mobile phone and they want to communicate to their family members, and they want to know whether they're in a field, and they want to know whether their children has arrived to home, they give a one missed call. And when they have arrived, they have eaten, they have taken, went to coaching institutes or certain things, they give two missed calls before leaving the home. So those kind of a communications things are also being alternative models that which is happening in India, which we have tried that, because one call is about 1 rupee or a 50 paisa. So not to waste that 50 paisa as well, specifically in rural India. So what they do is like giving a missed call instead of a talking on a phone. So that's something which is an alternative. Another alternative models that most like even if they are illiterate, they what we have tried to do them that the mobile phone has a specific digits 1 2 3 4, so they don't try to learn A B C D E, they try to learn 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. If one time we are pressing 1, so it's A, 2 time it's a B, so that's the way try to learn it. So those kind of things which is more not to try to make them completely literate, but yes, make them bring them some alternative solutions that they can learn about these technologies.
You, yes, thank you, Ritu, for giving us a perspective from India. And it's really interesting to know about the different barriers that you shared, which I suppose also exist in the other countries. And it's really interesting to learn about the alternatives that you mentioned. Using missed calls, I think we'd also do that in the Philippines, and having codes, so that women can use it, even women who are not really literate can use the mobile phones. That's very interesting to learn. Now, may we now hear from Jelen about the Philippine experience?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I would my sharing for today would in a way connect with what Rito have already started. I would start first my presentation by saying what is the meaning of access, and when we speak of access, for whose access are we talking about? I think there's a question in terms of when you say gender and access, do you only mean women? I think this is not just an issue of we're talking of a gender divide referring to men and women, but this is an issue of how different groups of women are marginalized and excluded because of varying contexts. And when we speak of these marginalized groups of women, access has a different meaning for them. So my organization, the Women's Legal and Human Rights Bureau, have been working with the marginalized groups of women for the past 2 to 3 years. We're working with women living with HIV/AIDS. I mean, just for as a context, no, women living with HIV/AIDS, domestic workers, and women migrant workers, or marriage migrants, LBT women, lesbian, bisexual, and trans women, and so on and so forth, no. When we talk about and IP women, no? So when I speak of issues referring to access of these marginalized groups of women, I will be more contextualizing it based on the experiences of these marginalized groups of women. So when we had a discussion, WLB and FMA had a discussion on women and access last December. Some of the issues that was raised is similar to what Ritu has been saying. Number one is the lack of infrastructure. Most of them, when you speak of ICT or technology, they're more familiar with cell phones, no, rather than internet. Because infrastructures is highly centralized in urban areas. Second is the issue of affordability and accessibility too. Similar to what Rito also shared, we also do that, no? The missed call, because we don't want to spend money. I mean, even I do that sometimes too, no? If I don't want to spend, I also do a missed call, and then that person knows that I've been trying to call that person. Another concern that has been raised by these marginalized groups of women is the lack of support from government, particularly to marginalized groups. Why? Because sometimes government looks at the issue of access as a homogeneous, as an issue that is gender neutral, as if that there are no specific needs and concerns between men, women, and other kinds of women. Digital literacy also is another issue, no? Because as I've earlier mentioned, we have smartphones, no? And not all women are familiar with smartphones. So they're more familiar with the basic cell phones, and they are not even familiar with the use of internet. So if, let's say, the government will provide infrastructures in rural areas, how do you now convince these women to go to that area to access internet if they don't know how to use the internet? One Moro women or Muslim women even talks about the lack of technology and ICT resources, particularly in conflict areas. So you have an issue of war, internal conflict inside in the southern part of the Philippines, and you're talking of infrastructures. So how they will go to that area if conflict is happening in a nearby street? I think I've been talking about marginalized sectors now intimidated with technology and ICT. But the real problem why government's services sometimes does not address the real context of women, of these marginalized groups of women, is because the lack of sex disaggregated data, which at the same time looks at the context of these women. Women have varying needs. Women from the IP community have different needs with the Moro women, with the LBT women, with the migrant women, and with the other kinds of women. So you don't look at these women as if they come from as if they are homogeneous. So I think what are we proposing? What the group in that conference were proposing? If we're talking of access, it should be inclusive. So we want ICT to be to include the concept of digital inclusion. So what do we mean by digital inclusion? Number one is accessibility. Services should be designed to meet all users' needs, including those dependent on assistive technology. When I speak of assistive technology, I'm talking of women with disabilities. Women with disabilities, like women with low vision or deaf women, have different kinds of technology. And that has to be addressed also. They have different needs with those who can hear and those who cannot hear. And sometimes the access to assistive technology is very difficult and sometimes very expensive. IP and rural women in far-flung areas, even the women in the context of disaster also has a physical problem when it comes to accessibility. So when we speak of accessibility, it has different meanings depending what context are we talking to. The second, when we speak of the second point, when we speak of digital inclusion, we also have to look at connectivity and access to the internet. People need the right infrastructure, but that is only the start. Sometimes when we talk of accessibility, we focus so much on infrastructures, and after providing that infrastructure, that's the end. So what these women also were saying is that's not the end. No, that's the start, because they have to learn the capacity, they have to make use of the internet or the technology to use them in their favor. Next is digital skills. No, I think it's connected with connectivity, being able to use computers and the internet. So if you're poor and marginalized, skills are important. My last point is how, when we speak of digital inclusion, we also have to address the needs of the marginalized groups. What info do they need? So for example, domestic workers, they need informations or content which focus on rights and freedoms from abuse. But sometimes these are not available in the internet. If their employers are trying to abuse them, where will they get those kind of information? On the other hand, LBT women who's not ready to tell the world who they are, but trying to explore about themselves and trying to understand their identities. So also, how do you do that? Where do you get that information? Women with disabilities have been discriminated also, because they think that if you are physically disabled, or let's say if you are psychologically disabled, you don't have the right to have sex or to have a partner. Mind you, there are women with disabilities in the Philippines who are into cyber sex. And they're not selling their bodies, but they are actually having sex in the internet because they feel beautiful when they go out and try to find someone to have their partner, they are being maligned. But when they go to that particular website in the internet, they feel sexy. And that's how they were able to explore their bodies and able to get their pleasures. The same also with psychological disability. How do you treat a woman with a Down syndromes and the likes, even men? Don't you think they also have the right to love or to explore their body? But sometimes parents are very protective. So some of them even find pleasurable things in the internet. But how the society look at them? So when I speak of addressing the needs of the marginalized groups, it's very broad, it's very specific, depending on the needs and requirements of these marginalized groups. Now, I would like to end my point by saying, when we speak of the SDGs, of SDGs and goal number 5, we have to interrogate how gender has been used to exclude women. We're not just talking of ICT access in terms of infrastructure, but we have to consider those points, especially those experienced by marginalized groups of women. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jelen. Thank you for talking about the experiences of marginalized groups of women. Yeah, thank you for giving us some recommendations as well on how we can further include women and not exclude them. And it's also always interesting to know that women really get benefits from being online, from being able to access ICTs. Even those with disabilities, they're able to get not just information, they're able to express themselves, they're able to explore their bodies and get pleasure from using the internet. That's good to know. So from the Philippines, we now move on to Pakistan. So Nigat will share us the perspective from Pakistan.
I think Jack and Jelen has set a very good foundation for the discussion. And while listening to Ritu, I felt that we are facing the same challenges when it comes to access and gender and access to ICTs. And while working on online violence against women, I think that there are like lots of challenges that are hindering women's access to internet and technology. It's the connection cost, the literacy, economic condition, and culture. And while addressing the challenge of violence when women face harassment while using internet and mobile phones, I feel that when there is a lack of awareness and education, and women don't know how to fight back. And when they don't know how to fight back, they sort of detach themselves from technology and internet because that's the only solution that they see. And there is also, when it comes to government, I mean, also one of the challenges is that there is no sex disaggregated data. There is a lack of research when it comes to gender and ICTs. Although we have a woman IT minister, and she won a Jamtech award by UN Women last year, but it's very sad that we also need to see, we always talk about that we should have women at the decision-making positions, but we also need to see that what kind of decisions they are making. And how much role they are playing in making those decisions. So there is, I don't see initiative, like really prominent initiatives by the government in addressing these challenges, but then there are community initiatives. For instance, we are doing Hamara Internet program. Hamara means, it's a Urdu word which means our internet, and we are going to the universities and colleges and talking to young women and girls and telling them that access to technology and ICTs it's also their fundamental right. It's a human right, and when they face violence, there is this notion that if women are using internet or mobile phone and they are facing harassment, this is a kind of package which comes with the internet. And it's very important to make them realize that harassment is on internet is a form of violence, and it's not only the women who are facing the harassment and need to fight back, but also the traditional human rights organizations or women rights organizations need to play their role. So right now there are like really uh, rare initiatives addressing these challenges, and I guess it's also it's one of the reason is the lack of education among even educated people, that how they can address this challenge and be part of the campaigns. So under Hamare Internet campaign, we go to universities and colleges, talk to young women and girl, and we try to make it a safe space where they can talk about the violence that they face, and then we tell them that how they can use these spaces safely and securely and can fight back. Another challenge that I see is the role of the law enforcement authorities who are responsible to deal with cyber crimes against women. It's a lack of legislation is one thing, but also how these law enforcement agencies respond to these challenges when it comes from women. And in some of the cases, we were told that while complaining to these agencies, they faced victim blaming and slut shaming, that why you are sharing your pictures, why you are sharing your data with your partners. So these kind of issues are also very important, and there is a lot of need of education and capacity building among the law enforcement, and empathy and compassion, which I feel is very rare when it comes to Pakistani society. So this is one community initiative that we are doing. Another one is where women is also using internet and technology for their economic gain. I mean, my friend is here, Maria, who is doing this Women's Digital League program in a very least developed areas in Pakistan, and she is going into the universities and colleges in least developed areas and telling women that how they can use technology and internet and make money and find economic opportunities. So these are the really community based initiatives which I feel that the government also need to look into and do it on the massive level. And I think one thing that when we talk about online violence against women, there is a important role of companies as well, that how they do respond to what they are doing about the harassment and violence happening on their platforms. Because most of the time when women come to us and complain, they always say, oh, we have reported this, but Facebook is not getting back to us. And I think the only solution that I can see is to just shut down my profile and don't use Facebook or other platforms. So these are the other challenges that I feel that companies also need to address while making their policies, while making their community guidelines. So yeah, I think I feel that the cultural barrier is and lack of awareness and education is our main challenges when it comes to women and women's access to ICTs in Pakistan.
Okay, thank you, Nigat, for sharing the perspective from Pakistan, and we can see that there are really similarities in the barriers and challenges in the three countries that were represented here. Nigat also mentioned to us about the role of government in promoting access, and we should also be mindful of the role as well of law enforcement agencies, especially when they deal with cybercrimes relating to women. So, and it's good to know about the Hamara Internet, an initiative from the CSO on teaching women how to fight back, especially when they are harassed, in providing a safe space for women to discuss. And she also mentioned about the economic gains that women can get by using ICT. And perhaps Maria later can share with us about their experience on how women are able to use ICTs for their economic gain. Yeah. So now we open the floor for questions. Um, yeah, and we also have, wow, we have 12 questions using from participants who logged in at slido.com. So unless there's a question from this room, we will go to the different questions that were posted by, I don't know if they're participants from here as well or remote participants. Yes, Maria.
Thank you, Nagat, for the very kind mention. I wasn't expecting that. Thank you. But my question is that internet is still in its infancy. If we look at the broader scheme of things, so it came around to Pakistan. It was around 1998 that we started getting access to the internet. So a lot of us are just exploring the whole sphere. So along with traditional education, don't we feel, I'll pose the question to Nigat and probably Ritu as well, because we belong to similar countries or cultures, that along with regular education, we should also have mandatory internet education in schools as a subject that teaches kids of all ages. I'm not just talking about at the elementary level, I'm talking about even college level, just teaching them what the internet can do for you, how empowering it is, but at the same time, what are some of the safeguards that you need to have. Like we're doing as a civil society, we are going into colleges and universities and telling people how to remain safe online. But shouldn't this be an important part of our educational system as well?
Yeah, I mean, while doing these sessions in universities and colleges, I feel it's very important that uh, uh, children from their school level, they should know that what exactly internet is and how they can use technology to empower themselves, but also how they can use it safely and securely. And I think this is a very important part. But as I said earlier, that government also needs to realize that what role they can play in initiating these initiatives. And I think some of the governments are doing it, but I think it'll take it'll take some time to for governments to realize that it's a really important subject and it needs to be part of our regular syllabus or our textbooks. Yeah, so I think from my side, I feel that it's these are the initiatives that the governments should take. And like as I said, that the small community initiatives that we are doing, you and my organization and some others are doing in Pakistan. I think there is a gap between the civil society initiatives and the government's initiatives, and the lack of trust between CSOs and the government. So especially in these cases, they need to join hands together and ask the experts who are already in the community and how they can enhance these initiatives.
Especially like in a country like India, the access is one of the major challenge. The first thing that when they don't come online, how they will realize that what is the world outside their community as well. So lack of infrastructure, lack of access is one of the major challenge. But definitely yes, that the digital providing them a security and safe guidance is another layer of awareness. First layer is making them aware about what and how internet can be used for their betterment of lives, to talk about their issues, rights, what exactly right they have in a family, as they are. In India, it is said that man is running the family, like man is the owner of that particular family. But it is not that women is also running the family side by side as well. Women who manages the workload of the man as the same in a workforce area as well. So why it is that when access to technology come, when any access to anything is coming up, it's coming to a man. The first owners is coming to a man. If even if purchasing a bicycle or anything, it's the first the man is given a priority. Lack of awareness is one of the biggest challenges in India that when we are talking it about. When we are talking about why equality has to come from both the side, and any kind of a technology should be a neutral. In some of the committees, when we are doing a certain kind of a CSOs and the online violence, which Nikat has mentioned about it, it is also that it's run to by all of three of us. CSOs, government and private all have to come together and talk about the safe space of internet and safe space of those issues, because these are the things which are making gender gap more viable in this scenario. Like even we don't have first we have a social challenge, second we have a patriarchal challenge, then we do not have access to it, and then you are making dangerous space for us by even if we are coming, you are giving us a hate speech, you are doing dangerous things, then how can we access it? So this is not only the challenge of awareness, it's also from government as well as from a private society stakeholders, because they have to understand that 50% of a population who are users, they are going to be women. When 50% is your marketing strategy should be that how to make women online, but how to make women safe online, that should be their marketing strategy.
Yes, thank you, Ritu and Ligat, for responding to the question of Maria. So we have another question here. Yeah.
Hi.
Can you please identify yourself first and your
I'm
organization?
Smita from Point of View, Mumbai, India. I just wanted to make a quick comment, like because gender and access is a very important issue, especially right now. But I think it's also important to remember that it's not just access for the purpose of empowerment and information alone. It's also access to using the technology for pleasure. You need to remember that it's important to remember that when you're allowing women access to technology, you can't just tell them that you need to use technology for looking up information about, women's empowerment or trains or, how to better manage your house or how to go to work safely. You should also allow, they should also be encouraged to use the technology for exploring their sexuality, exploring things which they actually enjoy doing. And I think that is something that many organizations which some organizations which work on access don't really focus on, because it doesn't come on the priority list, right? Like if there's a hierarchy, that doesn't come on the priority list per se. So I think it's important to like keep that in mind also, like when we are speaking about access. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Smita. But I think Julian also mentioned about that, right? The exploration of one's body, gaining pleasure from the use of technology. And it's good that there are comments like that coming from the floor. Yes, we have another one question.
More of a comment. In Sri Lanka, basically, we find that more students and the youth actually, as well as those who are employed are the ones who use internet. And even when it comes to students, females use the internet in their universities and instead of other spaces, because Sri Lanka has provided something called e-nanasalas, which is a space for people to come and use the internet. But still it's been found that there aren't many women that are actually accessing these places. So while we need to make a safe space online, I think that we need to make a safe space offline as well for women to come and actually access these spaces. So that's something that I think is important too.
Yes, thank you for that comment, for the use, for creating spaces, safe spaces, not just online, but offline as well. So, any more questions from the room? Otherwise, we will go through the different questions that were posted at slido.com. So, let's go through the first question. So, encourage the men who are also in the room to join in the discussion. So, we have some. Would you like to? Yes, yes, please. No, I thought you were raising your hand. Yeah, you can. Mr. Chon, perhaps you have this book. Perhaps the issue about the topic on gender and access can be included also in the book that you're writing, editing.
uh, look into. Okay, my question is APSIG. The right now we have a human rights track, and if you see the website, we'll have a 4 entry. First one is those human rights general, on which everyone agree. Second one is gender, this title, gender and the internet. The third one is privacy. And the fourth one we are coming up is minority and the internet. The original name was disability, but we sort of changing to the minority. Minority means the senior, like people in the 90 years old, 100 years old, or the children, handicapped, or the economically handicapped. And then first of all, those you are discussing many of those issues. I'm saying, commenting. So does it make sense to have those four from your perspective? And because we are going to revise sometime in September, those 4 entries are proper, or are we missing something, or shall we shrink? Now one of the concerns I have here is why gender and internet? Because what you're discussing here is exclusively woman and the internet. You're not discussing the male and the internet at all. And so that's my question. And then many of the issues you raise here is sort of overlapping with the minority and the internet. And looking into this session, APrIGF, we do have those gender on the internet, but we don't hardly have any on those minority on the internet. And it seems to be you are in the best position to address this issue. But what you're saying is gender on the internet is not good enough. We need more. And so you could address those minority issues. And if you have a good idea, please send it to me, as we want to revise APrIGF, and also the history, Asia internet history. We want to add probably one chapter on those issues you are addressing. So if you have a good idea, let me know. Sort of a time frame of 1 year to develop a chapter with say like 3-4 sections, altogether more like 50 pages. Would you like it into? And if there's any good those article, just let me know. Probably we may start from the what we have in Asia Pacific. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. So there's an open invitation for us to improve the book by putting more a gender flavor into that. Yeah, anybody who would like to comment?
I think it'd be really great if, as part of the effort of the book and as part of participating in this conversation, that you will be able to assign some of the writers in your book to really understand and unpack the gender dimension of access, rather than to, rather than to kind of say that, since you guys are talking about it, you guys can do it. And I think the beginning is saying that making space for it is fantastic. Yeah, like thinking like, okay, the first step is really to think, okay, this is kind of important. Maybe we should think about this. But I think the more people who come and interrogate this question, the better our understanding would be. And then the second point is also to say that women are not a minority. I know, but sometimes we talk about it as if it is, right? Because we're talking about disparity and discrimination, and as if that there's something that there is something that is that resonates with minority issues, and that I think is also one of the primary problematics with looking at framing at this question, because really women are not minorities. Like in at least half the population, in some places more than half. So why then do we get less access to resources? Why then do women and girls all over the world, whether developed or developing, have less control over resources, earn less money, etc., etc., etc.? So I think that's one of the questions that every time we think about the gender issue, we bring to the table, that this very fundamental basic inequality is just not really acceptable. And thirdly, I guess every time we talk about gender issues, less so now, but sometimes, more the question of what about men sort of comes up. And the reason why this comes up is because I think men, it's true, I think we tend to also focus quite a lot about unpacking the issues that face women, and don't really unpack the contribution that men make in perpetuating this sort of discrimination, right? Apart from using terms like patriarchy, which nobody really sort of understands. So maybe to put it simply, men is like it's like the invisible golden standard. So when we talk about everything in relation to this invisible golden standard is what applies to, you sort of construct the whole world, and you construct the internet and construct policies based on this kind of invisible golden standard. So that's why we have to make this invisible golden standard visible, to show how it is actually not responding to the diversity of people and the needs faced by different people. And gender is just the first step, really. And that's why you're saying, look at other sorts of intersectionality, other sorts of people living with disabilities, for example, and as Jelaine raised, all kinds of other kinds of intersectionality, even within the gender category itself. So, for example, women living with disabilities, women in rural areas, trans women, so on and so forth, they do face very specific and different kinds of challenges. And I think it's great that when we first start talking about one of this specificity, which is just the basic difference between men and women, we already start to open our eyes to look at more and more forms of specificity. But I think it's both unsustainable, unfair, and not very useful if we just look to women's rights activists to start solving some of these issues. I think it will really definitely be a lot more what's the word? It will be a lot more it's not even important. It's just like we're trying to solve a problem together. Yeah, we're all concerned about access issues. No, we all are trying to solve this problem and to address it, because we really see the value of the internet. That's why we're here. But then we kind of solve it with like that, and then we sort of say, okay, but this part, just small group of people do it. I think if it helps if all of us kind of do this and participate in every session like this, rather than sort of expect just sort of half of the room to do this. That's also very, it's something weird about the way that we approach this, I guess.
Okay. Yes. Another question or
No, I'm sorry.
comment?
Is it going to click on in a moment? Yes. I was hesitant when I waved my hand, when I was just waving my hand to sort of say hello, because a lot of these issues I find difficult to break between ICT for D and where the internet governance aspect comes in. And I find that quite often with a lot of the subjects now in the Internet Governance Forum broadly. So that's one reason why I'm hesitant to comment, because I don't know quite where that division is. And having done a lot of work that's looked at things like early work of the Grameen Bank and so on, where they were doing the earliest work on empowering women and handsets and early mobile phones into various parts of I suppose it was Bangladesh at the time. That was interesting. But I'm interested, one thing that sort of struck me is how are these technologies being abused, and how can we counter that abuse? And one thing that I'd heard particularly about, but this was in an African context, was of women who were being offered jobs online, particularly through texting services, and it's a scam, basically sexual predation, I suppose, that people were being offered jobs in other countries, being taken to the country probably without the appropriate visas, and then finding that they were ending up as sex workers because they were exploited in that way. And so scams that exist offline that are moving online, and are there ways to counter that? And is there work being done on that type of abuse, is something that I thought was quite interesting. It's something that I'd heard about quite a lot in East African and other contexts.
For the Philippines, I'm not very much familiar in terms of how internet has been used to promote, let's say, to recruit women in sex trafficking. But one common problems or experiences was more on the migrant women who wanted to work abroad, but eventually they were bait to work abroad, but eventually they didn't know that they were carrying drugs. Okay, and one particular case that I'm referring to is a migrant worker who's still in the death row in Indonesia. Her name is Mary Jane. So I think that's a common problem. I think that's one thing that we also have to contextualize when we speak of access, poverty issue. That having a cell phone, internet, eventually will not, maybe in a way will help contribute to at least alleviating poverty, but poverty will still remain. So how do you now connect the use of ICT to alleviate poverty? So for example, in the case of Mary Jane, she was, there are a lot of Mary Janes in the Philippines who were, through internet, were asked by mostly, I'm not being racist here, but mostly from African countries, asking them to become, to go for a trip actually in Southeast Asia, for a free trip in Southeast Asia. And for someone who hasn't been to Southeast Asia or who hasn't been traveling, you would be, of course, you will like the idea of free traveling. I mean, free travel, of course. And then it's really free travel, no? And then at the end of the day, you will be carrying a suit with drugs, and you don't even know that there are drugs. In some cases, there are those who carry drugs and have to swallow the drugs, no? That's the first kind of drug mules, no? You don't carry the drugs, but you put the drugs inside your body. And then at the end of the trip, you have to do something. You have to poop so that you can release all the drugs. And there are a lot of women, most of them, majority of them are women who have been paid to bring all those drugs to another country as either domestic workers or as women migrant workers. What you're saying is more the issue of internet being used to that eventually they will end up as prostituted women is mostly happening inside the country. I mean, the recruitment phase, especially in conflict areas, actually. Conflict, when Typhoon Haiyan happened, there were a lot of women recruited outside of the Visayas area to work as so-called domestic workers in the Philippines, but actually ended up as prostituted women. And there are also even in conflict areas in Mindanao where you don't even need to have a cell phone, but prostitution is already happening in evacuation centers because of lack of money, because of poverty issue. So what's the response? What's the answer? I think in that, because it's very systemic, I think there's a need for government intervention. Women's groups or NGOs can only do so much when it comes to addressing those needs or concerns. So what we usually do is to advise them through internet if they're very far, or we call them through cell phones and refer them to concerned government agency or partner NGOs. But I think a lot of things has to be done when it comes to the government must do something to really stop this kind of practices. But I think this is still an ongoing challenge, and I don't know when will it end.
Yes, and now we have more questions from the floor. Yeah, who's first? Maria and then Smita. Yeah.
Mine is more of an answer to what Jalene said, that how much can the internet help? Thank you. How much can the internet help with economic empowerment, and how can it break the poverty cycle? We have yet to see. So in my experience, what I've seen is that online, it doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is. It also doesn't matter where you are from. And you can work on anything from anywhere. For example, in the real life, if you're a Pakistani and you have just moved abroad to work and you're looking for work, you'll have far more problems finding a job. Online, nobody cares. Online, people just care about the service that you're providing at, the cost at which you're providing, and the quality with which you provide it. Secondly, for women to go out and find work in a place like Pakistan, it's really, really difficult. We have 3 big cities, and those are also big cities compared to other parts of Pakistan. Not really metropolitan cities, or what you can call cities at the bigger level. So we have Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, and that's it. After that, it's semi-urban. It's an urban-rural mix. You don't find work. That's where the economic empowerment comes. A woman, a young girl who gets a training online and starts working online doesn't have to get married to the first person that comes to ask for her, who is twice her age, because her father doesn't have to worry about feeding her, because she can do that now. And she can also pay for her siblings' school fee. That's one thing. Another young woman, I don't know what examples to give, doesn't have to hide the fact that she's on a wheelchair and there is no facilities in Pakistan for wheelchair-bound people. Like you have these special ways for paths made for wheelchair-bound people and special facilities. We don't have any of that. We don't have that kind of infrastructure for them. So what happens to them is that they become a burden on society. They don't have any money of their own. They can't spend on anything that they want for their health issues, for whatever. That's where economic empowerment through the internet comes in and it helps them. And also for the skilled women living in rural areas who have lots of middlemen coming in, buying their exquisitely embroidered clothes, for example, for peanuts, and then selling them at international exhibitions for hundreds and thousands of dollars. Now she can sell online on platforms similar to Etsy, if you're aware of Etsy.com. So you can sell online, right? So that's where the poverty cycle, as an abject poverty, where they have nothing, to where they can actually sustain themselves living off just $50 a month. So that's where it comes in, and it starts somewhere.
Yeah. Thank you, Maria, for that intervention. We have another one from Smita, and then we'll go to the other questions that were posted online.
Working during when conducting research, as well as working to improve access in rural areas and even urban for that matter, did you speak about caste, or did caste come up as a barrier or a thing in between? Can you tell a little on that, please? Thank you.
Okay. Unpacking I'll use this word unpacking because India is full of diversity. As you know, that religion, then there is a caste, and then there is a within a family there is a priority in a country within a circle of this one. And when we were doing research and when we are conducting research, it really comes out that women who are from a lower caste or what we call scheduled caste or scheduled tribe, they have minimal access to these technology. What it happens that I was reading certain things, and in a one when we were talking to them, we figured out that we do not have a time to go to even if we have a spare time, we do not access it because the mobile phone or the internet is most of the mobile phone is most of the time is with the female member. Okay, and the caste becomes also a major priority that for it's like a when you have a well, it's only be accessed by a majority community. Okay, and what we have even seen in our one of the center in a when we have placed one center in a community as well, women who were minorities and who were Dalits, they were not entering into as well due to a social and patriarchal challenge as well, that a person who's there in a coordinator and a center coordinator who's teaching and who's trying to bring awareness is a male. So we have to change the center person and coordinator person to a female, that women can be coming as well as attend those classes as well. So these kind of a challenge is always there. How to bring those kind of a gap is sometimes what we do, we sit with their family members, we sit especially with women family members, and to tell about that how are you using it. It's really interesting to see when we were in a field that they really do not want to explore internet for livelihoods, they want to explore internet for entertainment and for their sexuality as well.
Thanks, Ritu. We were actually looking at the different questions posted here. There were some specific questions to our three speakers, but I think some of the questions here have also been responded to already. Can we go to the last question here? That is, how do you deal with protectionist approach of different groups when it comes to women and girls' use of the internet? Would anybody want to respond to that? Is it really a protectionist approach?
I can say from like I have been working in India, and like my first few years of my job was to just to visit rural side of India, and it's interesting to see that nuances that I am trying to protect my girl and female members, because if they access internet, they might get into trouble. They are trying to what it is like, they are not such kind of a good girls in terms of that situation. And it's so talk I think we have already covered this question, but yes, the approach of accessing internet is also coming from that we are trying to protect our child, we are trying to not only female but also male also male child as well, like not giving a female members mobile phone or a certain kind of a technologies. They are allowed to access certain things at a certain particular time period, especially when everyone has used it, then it, because one family has one mobile phone either, or one maximum two mobile phones. Who is owning that mobile phone is firstly the man, and then male child, and then once it is done by everyone, then it comes to women who can access it. Is either it's a mother or a sister or whosoever. That's the way we try to access it.
I also feel it's not only the the community or the society or the family who has this protectionist approach, but also the state has this protectionist approach when they make legislations or policies. And for instance, that's something that I have witnessed in while making cybercrime bills most of the time when our IT, and it's a very problematic legislation that are going to be enacted. And most of the time when our IT minister, who is also a woman, comes on TV or gives her interviews about the legislation, she says, you know, our daughters and sisters are facing a lot of harassment on internet and we need to save them. And that's why they are bringing in very vague and ambiguous provisions, which from the outset it feels that they are protecting internet users, but the ambiguity has the space where people can abuse this legislation and violate freedom of expression and access to information. So it's the protectionist approach is a wider approach, you know, starting from our families to our state, where state tries to act as a nanny.
Yeah, thank you. Before we proceed to the other, same question. Okay, do it quick.
I actually put the question there. I wanted to know like how to work with the women's rights groups, who works on gender-based violence and war issue, who have like very protectionist approach, like they only think about safe house and stuff. So to make them, you know, convince the whole issue around internet, gender, and how do you do that? Like whoever has done that in their country, how have you been doing it?
I will try to connect your question with this question. WLB's work WLB started its work in 1991, post-martial law era. So we started our work on violence against women. But I think that's the challenge, no? Especially not only for women's human rights groups, but even government. It's easy to look at strategies which will criminalize, penalize negative actions or portrayals or violence against women. But it's difficult to comprehend, to understand, and even to come up with a program or policy if we're talking of positive rights, although I don't want to use positive rights, but when we speak of rights of women, particularly how do you use ICT to empower women, or let's say to speak about sexuality, or to explore about one's sexuality. I think that has been the challenge because it's embedded in our culture. I mean, it has been there for so many years, and I think that has been the ongoing challenge, not only of women's groups, but all groups as well. Men, women, and even LGBT. So before, we cannot even mention the LGBTIQ XYZ, no? Now, we can at least mention them. We can now say, oh, I'm lesbian, I'm blah, 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 I'm blah, 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 blah. I'm women with disability, and I'm trying to explore my body. Before, you cannot say that because it's taboo. And if you ask government, they will never put programs which will address or promote those kinds of things because it's not morally good, it's not acceptable. So how do you challenge not only women's human rights groups, but even child groups who are saying that children should be that you should use protectionist approach. One thing that we're trying to develop right now in WLB is how do we marry the concepts or principles of when we speak of children's rights, girl children, I'm not talking of girl children of 5 years old here. So because the problem with the Convention on the Rights of the Child, when we speak of children, we're talking of below 18. I'm not talking of 7, 8, 9, 10. No? It's a little bit challenging. I'm talking of the teenager who's trying to know more about their bodies, their sexuality, to know more about love, and so on and so forth. No? When we try to protect them and we invoke the rights of the principles of the CRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, whose best interest are we talking to? The best interest of the parents or the best interest of the child? And then the CRC also says that participation of the child. So if you're actually looking at the participation of the child, why are you imposing policies, or let's say why the government is imposing policies, or even the parents imposing certain rules if you're considering participation. And why, when we speak of participation and best interest of the child, the best interest of the child is different with the best interest of the child of a girl and a woman, of a child, a boy child and a girl child. So you will see there's really nuancing when we look at this protectionist approach. The protectionist approach is deeper when it comes to girl children compared to boy children. And why? It's still because of our culture. So we have lots of things to do, lots of works to do. And I think I will agree with Jack. This is not just the work of women's groups or groups working on gender equality. So when we speak of gender equality here, we're not just talking of equality or gender equality in relation to ending violence, but also how do we promote gender equality so that women, lesbian, bisexual, transgender women, will also enjoy these rights.
Yeah, thank you, Jalen. I think we're running out of time, so I'll just wrap up a bit. So we've been discussing that the key users of ICTs are actually women, but a lot of women, when we talk about the general population, a lot of women are still not included, actually. We talked about the similarities in the barriers and the challenges that women and LGBTQs face when it comes to the use of ICT. These would include sociocultural and patriarchal challenges, violence, and digital exclusion. But there are also initiatives that are being done, like by CSOs, for instance. Nigat mentioned about the initiatives of Hamara, Internet. And when we talk about gender and access, we're not just talking about women here, and we should also all be involved here. And some recommendations came up, like including internet education in schools, providing secure and safe guidance to be taught, and they should be CSOs, schools, and government should be part of this. Access should not be thought of not just as a means to gain information. Technology can also be used to explore one's sexuality, to gain pleasure. And then when we talk about digital inclusion, we have to bear in mind that different sectors have different needs and requirements that also have to be addressed, and government also should help us address the different issues. We also talked about digital literacy and the skills which women can use for their economic gains. So we actually have questions here. There were 13 questions, but we couldn't discuss them anymore here. So what we'll do is just to give the questions to our speakers, because there were specific questions here directed to specific speakers. And perhaps we can just continue the conversation outside and through whatever means as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming to this session.